Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This is your shortcut, your deep dive into complex topics. We sift through all the sources, add a bit of perspective, and boil it all down to what you really need to know. We're absolutely thrilled to have you back with us. Seriously, the number of you tuning in has been amazing. And seeing those views, well, it really means a lot. It tells us we're on the right track with the research and everything that goes into these deep dives. But here's something we wanted to mention. We see you listening, and we really appreciate that we do. But, a lot of you listen, and then, well, you just vanish without a trace. You get the info, maybe you have that aha moment, but maybe forget to hit like or subscribe or even just drop a quick comment. And honestly, that stuff, the likes, the subscribes, the comments, it's actually super important. It's like fuel for us. It tells the platforms you like this, it tells us you're out there enjoying it, and it lets us bring you even more of this content. We've got a ton of amazing material lined up, really fascinating stuff, but we can only make it happen with your visible support. So yeah, if you're getting something out of these deep dives, please let us know. Click the button, leave a word. It helps more than you might think. Okay, now on to today's topic. And it's a really captivating one. If you got drawn into our last deep dive on the Hollow Earth enigma, and we heard from a lot of you who did, then you're gonna love this. Today, we're plunging into another massive mystery, Lemuria, the lost continent's enduring mystery. Our mission, like always, is to take all these incredible sources, scientific papers, ancient myths, new discoveries, and just unpack the most vital bits for you. We want you to walk away feeling like you really get Lemuria. It's a story that really pushes the boundaries of history, science, and myth.
It really is a fascinating topic. And, the weird thing is, it doesn't start where you'd expect, like with ancient scrolls or anything. It actually starts with 19th century scientists looking at animals, zoologists. So we'll trace this whole idea from that scientific beginning through how it got picked up by these ancient legends and right up to some, well, pretty intriguing modern discoveries that might just make us rethink everything.
Okay, I'm hooked already. Animals leading to a lost continent. Let's start there.
Yeah, it sounds kind of backwards, doesn't it?
Totally. So how does that even happen? Where does the animal part come in?
Right, so the story really begins with this guy, Francis Philip Sclater. He was a pretty prominent zoologist back in the 19th century, and he spent a lot of time studying animal life, especially how species were spread out across places like Africa and Asia.
Okay, studying animal distribution. Makes sense for a zoologist.
Exactly. But what he found was puzzling. He noticed this really striking similarity, almost uncanny, between certain animals living in Africa and animals living way over in Asia. Continents separated by a huge ocean.
Similar animals, worlds apart. How did they explain that back then? Before plate tectonics and stuff.
Well, that was the problem. Their explanations were pretty limited. They talked about land bridges, strips of land that might have existed and then sank, or maybe animals floating across oceans on, like, rafts of vegetation.
Right, I've heard of those theories.
But for some of the similarities Sclater was seeing, those ideas just didn't seem to cut it. The distances were too vast, the animals too specific. It was a real geographical anomaly for the science of his day.
So what specific animals are we talking about? Did he focus on anything in particular?
Ah, yes. And that's crucial. It wasn't just a general thing. He zoomed in on one particular puzzle, and it's what gave the whole lost continent its name. It was the lemur enigma.
Lemurs, like the ones in Madagascar.
Exactly like the ones in Madagascar. But here's the kicker. Sclater found lemurs, or very, very similar small primates, not just in Africa and Madagascar, but also in India.
India. Wow, okay, that's a huge jump across the Indian Ocean.
A massive jump, especially for small tree-dwelling animals that don't exactly swim oceans or migrate vast distances. How could they be almost identical in both places? And remember, back in the 19th century, the known range of lemur-like creatures was even wider. They were reported in parts of Southeast Asia, maybe even Australia, besides India and Africa.
Okay, wait, so lemurs used to be all over the place, not just Madagascar.
Apparently, yes, or at least animals very closely related.
Yeah.
Compare that to now. They're almost gone, really only surviving in the Comoros Islands and, of course, Madagascar, their last big stronghold.
Right, so that historical range makes the puzzle even bigger. How did they get across that massive ocean? A land bridge explanation starts to look a bit flimsy for that kind of distance.
Exactly. A simple land bridge seemed highly unlikely for a whole population of these specific primates showing such close similarities. Rafting across the Indian Ocean also seemed like a stretch.
So Sclater stuck with this lemur problem. What does he do?
He proposes something bold. really bold for the time. He doesn't just tweak the existing theories, he comes up with a whole new geological explanation. In 1864, he publishes this article, Mammals of Madagascar. And in it, he basically says, look, the only way this makes sense is if once, long ago, Australia, South Africa, and a large part of Asia were one large continent.
Whoa, okay, that's a huge claim. A supercontinent connecting all those places.
Well, maybe not quite that big initially, but specifically for the lemur problem, he proposed that in the distant past, India and Madagascar once formed a separate continent.
Ah, connecting India and Madagascar specifically.
Yes, and he needed a name for this hypothetical landmass that explained the lemur's distribution, so he called it Lemuria.
Lemuria. Named after the lemurs. That's brilliant, actually.
It really was.
Yeah.
And for the scientists of the day, zoologists, paleontologists, it was such a neat fix. It was this convenient solution that explained these really awkward facts about where animals were found. No more need for impossible migrations.
So did other scientists buy it? Was it just some fringe idea, or did it catch on?
Oh, it definitely caught on. It wasn't dismissed at all. His theory was then considered reliable and was enforced for some time. It got real traction in the scientific community. Zoologists, paleontologists, even some early geologists thought it made sense. It fit the data they had, given what they knew or didn't know about geology back then. Remember, continental drift wasn't really a thing yet.
So Lemuria was a scientifically respectable idea for a while.
Absolutely. It provided a solid framework for understanding animal distribution. But here's the twist. This scientific respectability kind of accidentally opened a door to something completely different.
How so?
Well, once you have scientists talking seriously about a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, it starts to connect with other ideas, whispers, legends.
Ah, so the science gave a sort of anchor to pre-existing myths about lost lands.
Exactly. And Sclater himself wasn't totally unaware of this. It turns out, even as he was developing the scientific idea, he actually mentioned ancient Indian texts speaking of a lost land called Kumari Kondam.
He mentioned Kumari Kondam, so he saw a potential link even then.
It seems so. He might have seen it as bolstering his scientific case, finding a kind of legendary precedent. Or maybe it just resonated. Either way, the scientific hypothesis of Lemuria suddenly found itself echoing these much older traditions.
Okay, so let's dive into those legends. What did they say? You mentioned Kumari Kondam.
Right. And spurred on by Sclater's work, historians and others started digging into these legends more seriously, and they found quite a bit. There were these numerous legends from Indian monks, for instance, that didn't just talk about a lost land, but specifically about a mysterious continent Mu.
Mu, is that the same as Lemuria or Kumari Kondam?
Well, the names get a bit tangled, but Mu is often associated with Lemuria, or seen as a larger Pacific version. These legends describe Mu as enormous, stretching from the northern tip of India all the way to Easter Island.
Wow, that's huge. Way bigger than just connecting India and Madagascar.
Much bigger. And the descriptions were quite specific. They said Mu was made of 3 massive frontal separate pressures separated by seas. Sounds almost like volcanic ridges or distinct land masses connected somehow.
And did the legends say what happened to Mu?
Oh yes, very consistently. They claimed it was utterly destroyed 12,000 years ago by volcanic eruptions and a huge earthquake. A cataclysmic end. The consistency of that destruction narrative is really striking.
12,000 years ago. That date keeps popping up. And it wasn't just India. Did other cultures have similar stories?
Absolutely. You find similar ideas across the Pacific. The legends of the peoples of Oceania, for example, talk about a huge land that once was in the place of large and small islands scattered in the Pacific Ocean.
So multiple cultures, India, Pacific Islanders remembering a vast land that sank beneath the waves.
It certainly looks that way. It makes you wonder if it's a shared memory of some real massive geological event. How else would such separate cultures have such similar specific stories?
Okay, so we have the landmass, the cataclysm. What about the people? Did the legends mention who lived there?
Ah, that's another fascinating layer. There's this really intriguing corroboration allegedly found in a Tibetan monastery archive.
Tibetan monks again. What did they find?
A text, supposedly, that mentioned strange short people. And it claimed that almost all the tribes in the southwestern Pacific and India struggled against these people in ancient times.
Short people, like
Wow.
different from the local populations.
Apparently, and this connects to other sources. Think about the Ramayana, the famous Indian epic poem,
Oh.
dating back maybe to the 4th century BC.
Right, Rama's story.
Well, in the Ramayana, King Rama fights short, dark-skinned people who came to India from Sri Lanka, particularly in the south.
Huh. fighting short people from the south, where Lemuria or Kumari Kandam was supposed to be.
Exactly. And even the really ancient Hindu religious texts, the Vedas, they have this mention of unknown, small and weak people who appeared out of nowhere in the lands of India and then suddenly disappeared.
Appeared out of nowhere and then disappeared. It paints a picture of refugees, maybe? Survivors from a sunken land?
It certainly could be interpreted that way. These consistent descriptions across different sources, Tibetan archives, the Ramayana, the Vedas, of these distinct, smaller people who were foreign, fought with, and then vanished. It's pretty compelling. It hints at some real historical encounter, maybe linked to these lost lands.
Let's go back to that name Sclater mentioned, Kumari Kandam. What's the story there?
Right, Kumari Kandam. That name has huge significance, especially for the Tamil people of southern India and Sri Lanka.
It's part of their heritage.
Deeply. For many Tamils, it's not just a myth. It's considered the cradle of their civilization, their ancestral homeland, now lost beneath the sea, a place of great antiquity and learning.
So how old is that story? When does it first appear?
Well, that's where there's some debate. Modern scholars, using things like linguistic analysis and dating written texts, often say the recorded mentions of Kumari Kandam in Tamil literature seem to appear around the 15th century AD.
The 15th century? That's much later than the supposed sinking 12,000 years ago.
Exactly. Which leads some scientists to suggest the legend itself, at least in its written form, might be relatively recent.
But what do the Tamil people say?
They strongly disagree. They claim and also refer to other ancient texts they believe are much older, possibly written in different scripts or languages, that also mention this sunken land. They argue the knowledge is far more ancient than the 15th century records suggest.
So it's a clash between modern dating methods and a deeply held cultural tradition.
Pretty much. It highlights that classic challenge. How do you weigh written records against oral traditions or potentially lost older texts? The Tamil conviction about Kumari Kandam's ancient reality is incredibly strong. It's more than just a story for them.
Okay, so we have the scientific idea of Lemuria and these ancient legends of Mu and Kumari Kandam, possibly inhabited by these short people. This is where things start to get really elaborate, right? People started building a whole world out of these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. The combination of a scientific hypothesis and these evocative legends was like rocket fuel for the imagination. Researchers, mystics, writers, they took these threads and wove this incredibly detailed picture of Mu. It wasn't just a land bridge anymore. It became this enormous continent in the Pacific, a whole civilization.
The kind of civilization.
A really diverse one, apparently. The stories described it as home to representatives of the white, black, brown, and yellow races all living together.
All races living together. That sounds utopian almost.
It does. And supposedly they were all united under one banner, the Empire of the Sun.
The Empire of the Sun sounds impressive. Who was in charge?
It was ruled by these clever kings bearing the title Ra Mu. Ra, like the Egyptian sun god, and Mu for the continent. It suggests a centralized, maybe theocratic form of government.
And how many people were supposed to be living there?
Get this. The figure often cited is 70 million inhabitants.
70 million! In ancient times, that's huge. That's more than many major countries today.
It's an absolutely staggering number for an ancient civilization. It implies a level of organization, resource management, food production, infrastructure that's just way beyond what mainstream history usually allows for that period.
Okay, a vast multiracial empire of 70 million. But you mentioned earlier there were different types of people, right? Not just races, but lifestyles.
Yes, and this is one of the most fascinating and frankly strangest parts of the elaborated Mu narrative. Within this massive empire of the sun, there were supposedly two very distinct groups living almost parallel lives.
Two groups, how were they different?
Okay, so first you had the civilized group. These were the builders, the doers. They lived in cities and villages. They practiced agriculture, fishing, construction. They were skilled in craftsmanship. Basically, they built the physical society.
So sort of like standard civilization builders.
Pretty much. And physically, they were described as looking like a modern person, almost like Caucasians. They were strong and muscular people, fully adapted to the difficult realities of the world. Pragmatic, capable survivors.
Okay, the civilized group. Who is the other group?
This is where it gets really interesting. They were called the forest dwellers, and their whole focus was completely different. They weren't into building cities or mastering the physical world. They sought unity with nature, spiritual perfection, and a harmonious connection between soul and body.
Spiritual perfection. So more like mystics or ascetics.
Exactly. And this focus apparently had physical consequences. They were described as physically weak, because they didn't prioritize physical strength. They improved their brain, not their body.
Improve their brain. How? What were they interested in?
Their interests were, well, extraordinary. The texts claim they focused on things like development of intuition, intellectual abilities of the brain, clairvoyance, teleportation, levitation, and telepathy.
Whoa, okay, teleportation, levitation, that's straight out of science fiction or fantasy.
Right. Imagine a society where one group is building bridges and farming, and the other is practicing telepathy and trying to levitate. It's a wild concept, a civilization with this deep, fundamental duality.
So you have this vast, complex civilization with these two distinct groups. But the legends all agree on what happened next, right? The cataclysm.
Yes. Despite all the complexity, the advanced society, the spiritual pursuits, it all came to a sudden, violent end. The legends consistently point to that date again, 12,000 years ago. A terrible natural cataclysm strikes Mu. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes.
Cliff works and just sank.
Completely sank into the depths of the sea, taking millions of people to the seabed. It wasn't a gradual decline. It was depicted as swift, total annihilation. An entire continent gone.
Millions of people, including both the civilized group and the forest dwellers. What happened to any survivors?
Their fates were very different, reflecting their different adaptations. The civilized survivors, the strong practical ones, well, some managed to escape and survive. They sailed to foreign lands, presumably taking their skills and knowledge with them, and because they were adaptable, they very quickly adapted to the new flora and fauna, painlessly adjusting to unknown lands.
So they spread out and basically started over.
Seems like it, but it wasn't necessarily easy. The legends say they fought with local peoples for their place under the sun and started a new life. So, conflict and resettlement.
Okay, what about the other group? The forest dwellers. The ones focused on the mind, not the body.
Their fate was much harsher, according to these narratives. They were in much more difficult situations. Why? Because they were absolutely unsuitable for unseen conditions with poor physical development.
Their focus on the mind left them physically vulnerable.
Exactly. They weren't equipped for the raw struggle for survival in a new, potentially hostile environment. The legends specifically mention their attempts to gain a foothold on the Indian subcontinent.
And how did that go?
Tragically, it resulted in almost entire population, unadapted to fight, being destroyed by the existing peoples there. A devastating outcome for this group.
So were they completely wiped out?
Not quite, according to the story. There were pathetic remnants, survivors who realized they couldn't compete on the surface world.
So what did they do? Where did they go?
This is where it connects back to other myths. They supposedly went underground. They started building tunnels and cities beneath the Earth's surface.
Underground cities, like the Hollow Earth idea almost.
Sort of, yeah. They essentially disappeared from the sight of aggressive people of India. And the sources hint this wasn't just in India. Similar disappearances of these weaker, spiritually focused survivors happened in other parts of the world too, after fleeing cataclysms or wars. They retreated from the surface world.
Wow, that's an incredible narrative arc. From a supercontinent to underground remnants. So we've gone from science to myth to this incredibly detailed, almost novelistic story. What happened next? Did people try to, verify any of this?
Well, the story continued to evolve. The scientific origins kind of faded into the background for many, and the mystical aspects really took over. Philosophers, mystics, and unorthodox Christians, they really latched on to Lemuria. It wasn't just history for them anymore.
What did it become?
It became a symbol, a cradle of spirituality. They saw it as representing the highest substance of spiritual perfection, a lost golden age of human potential.
And you mentioned Helena Blavatsky earlier. She was key in this.
Very much so. As a co-founder of Theosophy, she wove Lemuria deeply into her complex spiritual system. For her, Mu wasn't just a place. It embodied a whole set of inexplicable and pure forces hidden in man. It was about our lost psychic abilities, our deeper connection to the universe.
So Lemuria became less of a place on a map and more of a state of being almost, a spiritual ideal.
Exactly. It shifted from geography to metaphysics for many people in those circles. But of course, that just made the scientific community even more skeptical.
Right, because where's the proof? All these spiritual ideas are great, but can you, find anything?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And people definitely tried, or at least claimed to have found proof. But these early accounts were problematic, let's say.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, probably the most famous is Colonel James Churchward. He wrote this book in 1931, The Lost Continent of Mu. Super influential in popularizing the idea.
What was his claim? Did he find ruins?
He claimed something even more dramatic. He said he met this monk in India, part of a secret brotherhood called the Nayakol School.
A secret monk brotherhood.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this school was supposedly founded 70,000 years ago on the ancient continent Mu itself. And they held ancient knowledge, powerful power, greatly exceeding the technical development of the modern world.
70,000 years ago, wow. And what did the monk tell him?
The monk allegedly showed churchward ancient tablets detailing Mu's history and revealed that the continent was destroyed 14,000 years ago. Notice the date shifted slightly there.
14,000 now, okay. So did Churchward bring back these tablets, photos, anything?
Nope, nothing concrete. No independent verification of the monk, the school, or the tablets. Which is why the scientific community basically said, look, great story, Colonel, but this is ideal ground for the creation of a science fiction novel, not evidence.
So dismissed as fantasy. Any other accounts like that?
There's another really curious one, told much later in 1975, but about an event in 1858. It's the story of an Indian merchant's great-grandfather.
What happened to him?
He was supposedly fleeing a rebellion, fell into a hidden hole in the ground, and ended up in a huge underground cave system.
Another underground world.
Seems to be a recurring theme. He described this huge cave filled with white light and inhabited by these low-statured people of delicate build.
The short people again, living underground.
Exactly. And his description was incredibly detailed. Hollowed-out dwellings, roads, and places carved in rock, underground rivers, even artificial meadows with real sheep, all lit by the strange white light that acted like sunlight for plants.
Artificial meadows underground, that's amazing. How long was he there?
He supposedly spent months there before they helped him get back to the surface.
And what did scientists make of that story?
Same reaction, pretty much. Fascinating tale, echoes lots of folklore, but ultimately dismissed as a beautiful legend because there was absolutely no indisputable evidence. Just one man's story passed down through the family.
Okay, so Churchward's monk, the merchant's great-grandfather, lots of stories, no hard proof. It sounds like the Lemuria was destined to remain pure myth.
For a long time it seemed that way. The lack of physical evidence was the big stumbling block. But then, technology started to change things.
Yeah.
Especially underwater exploration.
So the search moved from dusty archives and legends to the actual ocean floor.
Precisely. People started thinking, if these places sank, maybe we can find remnants down there. And some researchers started proposing specific locations. Like a Professor Presotov in 1966. He wrote a monograph, The Lost Land, arguing Muji was real and pinpointing its likely location. The central belt of the Indian Ocean, the islands of Madagascar and Ceylon, Sri Lanka, as well as the archipelago east of them. He was trying to narrow the search area.
Okay, so moving towards actual potential sites, did anyone find anything?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. In 1985, a Japanese marine geologist, Professor Masaki Kimura, made a stunning discovery off Yonaguni Island near Taiwan.
Yonaguni? I think I've heard of that. What did he find?
He found what looked like enormous underwater structures. Pyramids, some call them, of 180 meters wide and 80 meters high.
Underwater pyramids.
Huge stone structures with flat terraces, sharp angles, what look like steps. Features that seem very unlikely to be natural formations.
Wow. And what did Professor Kimura think they were?
He was quite convinced. He suggested it was part of a huge complex of ancient buildings of the lost continent. And his proposed dating was even more staggering. 28,000 years BC.
28,000 BC. That would rewrite history completely if they're man-made.
Absolutely monumental. It's still debated. Some geologists argue they could be natural, but the evidence for artificial construction is compelling to many.
Okay, Yonaguni is huge. Any other potential underwater finds?
Yes. More recently, this century, there was a discovery off the western coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay.
What do they find there?
Sonar scans revealed ruins of what appears to be a huge city submerged in the bay. Geometric patterns, foundations, artifacts dredged up.
A whole city?
Yeah.
And could they date it?
They could, and this is crucial, using radioactive carbon isotope dating on organic materials recovered from the site, which is a pretty standard, reliable method. They got dates around 7,500 years BC.
7,500 BC? That's still incredibly old. That's thousands of years before the traditionally accepted start of major cities in that region, like the Indus Valley civilization.
Exactly. It pushes back the timeline for complex settlements in India significantly, and it's sitting right there, underwater, in an area potentially linked to the Kumari Kondam legends.
So we're moving from dismissed legends to actual dated underwater ruins.
It certainly seems that way, and it's leading some mainstream scientific institutions to reconsider these old stories.
Like who?
Well, for instance, the Indian National Institute of Oceanography. They've apparently stated quite strongly, today we already know that the lost continent of Kumari Kondam, i.e. Mu, existed.
Wow, an official scientific body saying it existed. That's a huge shift. What's their reasoning?
It's based on their geological and oceanographic studies. They point out that 14,500 years ago, the ocean level was 100 meters lower than it is now.
100 meters lower, that's a massive difference.
Huge. And crucially, that lower sea level would have created extensive land connections between India and Sri Lanka, and potentially much more land exposed across the Indian Ocean. Exactly the kind of land bridge Sclater needed for his lemurs, and the Tamils describe as Kumari Kondam.
So the land was there. What made it disappear?
Their hypothesis points to climate change, specifically the global climate warming that occurred in the period from 12,000 to 10,000 years ago.
The end of the last ice age.
Exactly. As the massive ice sheets melted, sea levels rose dramatically worldwide. They suggest this rapid rise in water levels could have been the cause of the inundation of lower-lying human settlements.
So the cataclysm wasn't necessarily earthquakes and volcanoes like the legends say, but a massive, rapid flood from melting ice caps.
That's the scientific hypothesis they're proposing. And think about what that connects to.
The Great Flood stories.
Precisely. Those stories of a world-engulfing flood that you find in almost every religion and culture across the planet. Maybe they aren't just myths about local river floods. Maybe they're the collective human memory of this very real global sea level rise event that drowned coastal civilizations. Not some regional event, but a huge cataclysm that left its mark on human history. Science and myth potentially pointing to the same massive event.
Okay, that's profound. Linking global flood myths to actual post-ice age sea level rise and potentially sunken cities like the one off India or maybe even Yonaguni. So, wrapping this all up, we started with lemurs, went through lost continents named Lemuria, Mu, Kumari Kondam, heard legends of vast empires, spiritual adepts, cataclysms, underground survivors, and now we have modern science suggesting the land masses could have existed due to lower sea levels, and finding actual underwater ruins dating back thousands of years earlier than expected.
It's quite a journey, isn't it? From a 19th century zoological puzzle to 21st century underwater archaeology, potentially confirming ancient myths.
And those conflicting dates for the destruction 12,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, the scientific window of 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, they all kind of cluster around that same period at the end of the Ice Age.
They do. It suggests different traditions might be remembering the same core event, even if the exact details or dates vary. It really highlights this fascinating blend of legend, speculation, and now emerging scientific data.
It really keeps that allure of lost civilizations alive, doesn't it? The idea that our history might be way older and weirder than we think.
Absolutely. And that leads to a really provocative final thought from the sources we looked at.
Oh yeah? What's that?
It basically says that despite these discoveries, the ancient continent of Lemuria is still waiting for its discoverers. The real truth is still out there, submerged. And it adds that the truth is not far away, and whoever reaches it first will be shocked by the diversity and splendor of the oldest civilization that was before all this.
Shocked by the splendor. That implies something truly advanced, doesn't it? Maybe confirming those legends of high technology or psychic powers.
It certainly leaves that door wide open. Imagine finding definitive proof of a civilization that predates Egypt and Sumeria by thousands of years, maybe with abilities or technologies we can't even comprehend. How would that change our understanding of ourselves, of human potential?
It would change everything. What a thought to end on. The truth is out there, waiting.
Still waiting.
Wow. Okay, that was an absolutely incredible journey into Lemuria and Mamu. My head is spinning a little, and if your head is spinning too, or if you just found this deep dive fascinating, please remember to do us that huge favor. Hit the like button right now, subscribe to the channel if you somehow haven't already, and this is really important. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you thought. Ask questions. Share your own theories. Your engagement, seriously, it's what keeps the deep dive going. It lets us know you're here, you're listening, and you want more. We truly appreciate every single listen, like, and comment. Thank you for being part of this. And we promise the next deep dive we've got lined up for you. Oh, it's going to be very, very interesting. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Definitely stay tuned. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring. You never know what truths are still buried, waiting to be rediscovered.